Of course, we had been speculating about this for over a week. We had known that MTN was talking to somebody. It put out a cautionary last Friday. But it's all happened quite quickly because, of course, this time last year, they were in deep talks with Bharti Airtel. Bharti, of course, has gone on to tie up with Zain. Are you surprised with the speed at which both parties have found new partners?
I don't think so. I think one reason, let's talk the Bharti situation first. I think Bharti was always looking at expanding its footprint outside India. Two reasons, I guess, primarily because India was a big market, tariffs are very low, and it's highly competitive. So they've been looking for a while. So to us, I think our viewpoint is having failed with MTN twice running, it was very easy switch for them to look at a basket of assets, which is very similar to MTN if you exclude certain key assets, particularly South Africa and some of the Middle Eastern assets. So that's not a surprising move at all. I think from an MTN perspective, perhaps a bit more surprising, but again, I think MTN is quite optimistic in the way it looks at these opportunities. So whilst we don't believe these opportunities would have been on the radar screen the last 6 months, if you will, probably came up quite quickly, MTN is nimble enough and opportunistic enough to start to change its focus quite quickly to this new opportunity.
Do you think Orascom's African assets would be a good fit with what MTN has currently?
Absolutely. I think when you talk about African assets, again, you have to remember that certain assets are excluded in our view. Even if it's not explicit, I think it's quite difficult to imagine Orascom selling out Egypt, which is some market is where they started before they started branching out in other markets. The key assets you're really talking about, if they're including in the port, is Algeria, which is probably the key driver of this deal, possibly Tunisia, and the others are really rights and mices which come as part of the package, I think, more than anything else.
What do you think the price would be on the table for this? We have heard that MTN was trying to raise capital in the markets. Of course, it has some capital of its own. Mm-hmm. Do you think it could risk overpaying for Orascom's assets?
I think that's always a danger, and the way to look at it, I guess, is if you take MTN's position as a growth stock, then you got to ask yourself, the assets they are adding to the pot, are they going to be a growth story? I.e., does it add to that story? If you ignore the small assets, as I'm saying, I think apart from Algeria and Tunisia, Algeria is actually quite a well-developed market. So this is not in Nigeria, this is not in Iran either. And the likelihood is France Telecom is coming into Tunisia. I think there is a third license being issued. And QTEL
so there will be some competition in that market.
There will be competition, and it's also a relatively mature market. So we don't see that as a growth story. So where's the growth? It may just be an addition to the footprint, which looks great on paper, or obviously has significant EBITDA, but not necessarily growth.
Of course, we do know that MTN CEO Chiluba Mumbi is not renewing his contract, so he won't be the CEO of MTN for very much longer. Is this a bad time then for MTN to go on the acquisition trail when we don't know who's going to be taking this company forward?
Yeah, I'm not too sure it's a bad time. Again, it comes back to a question of how opportunistic this Algeria is, if you will. If it was an opportunistic acquisition which came up quite quickly, regardless of Chiluba's intention, then you can see the rationale for MTN to have to move very quickly. And by the way, once you qualify, this is not a done deal. I think the speculation is not exclusive discussions. So there may be a couple of other buyers in the wings, but obviously MTN is the name that's come to the fore. But regardless of that, it was a little bit surprising that this sort of deal would be done, and a CEO has announced that he's actually exiting the business. I think at the last results, Chiluba was categorical that the board will allow him to do certain strategic things, which I want him to do. But among the strategic things, our expectation wouldn't have been another major acquisition. That's a little bit surprising. Probably housekeeping and the like, but certainly not a major acquisition.
Any idea who the other parties talking to Orascom could be? How about Vodacom? Because I mean, Vodacom has a relatively small African footprint so far, doesn't it?
No idea about the other competitors, possibly. QTEL, I think some of the Middle Eastern players probably will look at this. France Telecom seems to have ruled themselves out, I think for whatever reason. I guess they had some problems with Orascom in the Egyptian market because they're joint venture partners. But some of the Middle Eastern players, I think, if you take a Bharti example, when they sold the assets to Zain to Bharti that way around, they excluded some Arabic countries, specifically Sudan as an example. Now, Algeria is an interesting case, French-speaking and also Arabic, so some of the Arabic, I think, operators may be players in there. That's the likelihood, I think that's the way it will pan out. But clearly, I think that would be a little bit difficult if this MTN failed to do this, given the recent track record. So I think there will be other players to look at this.
If MTN wasn't successful in its bid for Orascom, are there other assets out there in Africa that it can still pursue, or should it be looking further afield?
Nothing quite as significant as Algeria on the continent. There are not too many assets available on the continent. I say Egypt is unlikely to be for sale. Orascom, France Telecom, JV. I think perhaps the other question, I think the more fundamental question you're asking is, should MTN acquire more assets? Now, in our view, I think a footprint of 21 assets is probably big enough. And they've got problems I think they need to resolve in Sudan, Syria, Iran. These are all interesting case studies, I think very potentially big markets. But remember, excluding those markets, I think MTN effectively, if you take South Africa, that region, plus the West African region, those contribute about 90% of EBITDA, which means those big assets in the Middle East are actually not contributing as much as one would expect. So the real question is, should they actually be expanding more, or should they be looking at the portfolio and extracting more value? Would veer towards the latter, I think. It's much more of an operational play now rather than buying more assets before you leverage what you've got.
So your view is they could really grow organically, focus on other data services as well, perhaps in the local operations where the telephony market might be a bit concentrated? Yeah,
I think that makes perfect sense. I think you asked a question about Vodacom before we move on from that topic. I don't think Vodacom would be playing this. Vodafone is already in North Africa, and if anything is done in that region, it's probably directly on the Vodafone stable. I think the way Vodafone will look at the situation, I was not assuming to speak on their behalf. I suspect Vodacom is standalone business. It's a great business. They are facing some problems in the DRC on some of the smaller assets, but I don't think Vodacom is a platform they use for any major acquisition of this significance.